All right. Hello, everyone. Greetings from the Archaeological Institute of America. My name is Omur Harmansah. I am the Vice President for Cultural Heritage for the Archaeological Institute of America. I'm on the governing board as well as serving as the director of the School of Art and Art History here at the University of Illinois, Chicago. So I'm connecting from Chicago today. In this webinar, we intend to take you to two countries with extraordinary archaeological remains and a wealth of cultural heritage. Our webinar is intended to highlight the ongoing archaeological work and the state of cultural heritage preservation in the countries, the People's Democratic Republic of Algeria, in North Africa, and the Republic of India in South Asia. So we're organizing this webinar primarily on the occasion of the upcoming consideration of cultural property and antiquities trafficking agreements, bilateral agreements with these two countries by the U.S. Cultural Property Advisory Board, or CPAC, to encourage our members and the public to be informed about supporting the signing of these agreements. The CPAC makes recommendations to the president about bilateral cultural property agreements between the United States and the nations seeking to protect their archaeological objects from looting and illegal export. Before recommending the bilateral agreements to be signed or renewed, CPAC reviews written testimony from constituents to determine whether countries are doing their part to protect their archaeological heritage and participate in cultural exchange. In their upcoming meeting on January 30th and February 1st, 2024, CPAC will solicit public testimony on the state of cultural heritage preservation in these two countries, to consider the renewal of the agreement with Algeria and to enter a new bilateral agreement with India. AIA is spearheading a letter-writing campaign to support these agreements. And I just want to say that you can really make a difference by submitting written public comments and attending the virtual CPAC meeting and contributing oral comments. If you have been to one or both of these countries and visited archaeological sites, we will be running the chat, and feel free to share with us what when you visited and what sites you have been to. In any case, I'm very excited to present to you today our two distinguished guests who will present to you their ongoing work in India and Algeria, respectively. Our first guest is Professor Monica L. Smith, professor in the Department of Anthropology and in the Institute of Environment and Sustainability at UCLA. She holds the Navin and Pratimi Doshi Chair in Indian Studies. With her colleague, Professor R.K. Mohanty, she has co-directed a long-running archaeological research project in eastern India and excavations at the sites of Sisupalgarh, Talapada, Ostapur, and their environs. Monica, I hope I didn't butcher these place names. Her books include A Prehistory of Ordinary People, published by University of Arizona Press in 2010, and Cities, the First 6,000 Years, published by Viking in 2019. Professor Smith is also on the governing board of the AIAs. Our second speaker is Professor Elizabeth Fentress. Hi, Lisa. Welcome.
Hi.
Lisa is an archaeologist of the ancient Roman world, and her regional specialization covers both Italy, the Italian peninsula, and North Africa. She's been most recently the honorary visiting professor at University College London. Lisa is a former president of the International Association of Classical Archaeology, corresponding member of the German Archaeological Institute, and a fellow of the Society of Antiquaries since 2006. In her work, she made remarkable contributions to Roman archaeology, writing about the slow-moving, long-term history of various geographies of the empire, including North Africa, and I want to mention her work in Sétif in Algeria in the 1980s, and also her amazing survey of the Djerba Island in Tunisia, with collaborating with my own mentor, Renata Holland. I'm sending greetings to Renata from here as well. Among her many publications, I want to mention An Island Through Time, Djerba Studies, Volume 1 with Renata from 2009, and the edited volume, Romanization and the City, Creation, Transformations, and Failures from 2000. So we're going to start with Monica, and we are going to hear about India. Yes, Monica, the floor is yours. Please feel free to share your screen. Thank you for doing this for us.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity to be here. I would like to add that I'm actually in India. So I'm broadcasting live from a place that I have been in and around for my entire professional career. And it has been really wonderful to be able to have the opportunity to work here and to have the opportunity to collaborate with colleagues and to learn so much from colleagues and students all over India through conferences and many other scholarly activities. And so it's a great honor and privilege to be able to represent some of what cultural heritage means in the US-Indian context. So the first thing is to think about how people in this audience or people writing letters might know about India, even if they have never been there. India is a place that is of increasing world importance and also a place with some of the most iconic heritage anywhere in the world. So wherever you are listening to this broadcast, you have probably been to a restaurant called the Taj Mahal, and you certainly recognize this very iconic building that, among other buildings, represents India. But there are also other reasons for people in the United States to be supportive of Indian cultural heritage. And that is, even if you have not been to India yourself, you or someone you know is working with somebody from India, because India is the second most frequent place from which immigrants come to the United States. And people from India have been in all kinds of professions and have contributed to American society while also being very much tied to Indian cultural activities back home. And it's very common for people to go back home on a regular basis and maintain family ties, which also means maintaining heritage ties. Another way that you have probably been engaged with Indian activities is, even if you have not been to India, India has come to you, because every museum in the United States has a prominent South Asian collection. And if you have been to Chicago or Los Angeles or the Metropolitan Museum of Art, you have seen these kinds of iconic sculptures. But even small museums all across the United States have India prominently represented as a component of global heritage and as a striking, distinctive art style that is very recognizable wherever you find it. I'd like to add that if you have been to India, if you've been so fortunate to be here, there are many places that draw the visitor's attention, including World Heritage sites that span the entirety of chronological time periods. So there are prehistoric sites that have been nominated to serve as World Heritage sites, recognized by UNESCO and put forth by the Indian government and the Archaeological Survey of India, which is the governing body for Indian archaeological activities. And then there are proto-historic sites, early historic sites, medieval sites, sites of even modern time periods and the colonial periods. So India has so much heritage and so much archaeology that it is something that is of great interest to global visitors, as well, of course, as to people in the region. And these are some images that I've taken of watching people at archaeological sites who are visitors from India and looking at the ways in which visiting a heritage site is part of school activities, it's part of family holidays, it's a part of education. You see people taking their children to archaeological sites and talking about history and experiencing the richness of the cultural heritage that is everywhere in this country. And many of these sites will draw on a weekend or a holiday, not just hundreds or thousands, but tens of thousands of visitors per day. So archaeological heritage is very much something that people in India from every walk of life, from every level of education, use as a focal point for enjoyment and education. And while many times in the United States, archaeology is something that appears maybe on page A25 of the newspaper down at the bottom corner somewhere, archaeological news in India is on the front page above the fold. And I say this from the singular experience of my colleague and I have been on the front page of the newspaper, as you can see here in this article about our research at Shishapalgarh. So here is Professor Mohanty and me with our team. And the interest in archaeology is so great that when there are discoveries or excavations, they are very prominently highlighted in the media. That aspect of doing archaeology and having the opportunity to engage with fellow professionals and students in India has powered my entire career. And these are some of the stunning images of the research at Shishapalgarh that formed the anchor of a long-running field project, not only excavations at this site, but other sites in the region where we've been looking at the ways in which early urban centers a couple of thousand years ago were places where the first coalescence of people into densely populated areas occurred. So we're looking at the chronology and development and the economic, social, political, ritual impetus of the creation of urban life in the eastern portion of the Indian subcontinent. There are many ways in which people in India protect and guide heritage appreciation for both local and international populations. And I would especially like to highlight the work of the Archaeological Survey of India, which is the government body that takes care of archaeological sites, conducts research, does training for their own students and staff, and also maintains the grounds, does conservation, and manages museums at many, many sites all over India. And along with the Archaeological Survey of India, there are state departments of archaeology. So every state has its own department of archaeology that also has personnel that do conservation, maintenance, excavation, exploration, and publication of archaeological materials. And there are also many departments in universities, schools, and colleges that engage in the explication and examination of Indian heritage. And I show you some nice images here of the Archaeological Survey of India when I was here in 2011, 2012. I've been fortunate to come just about every year. What we saw all over in all the archaeological sites were big banners that were celebrating the 150th anniversary of the Archaeological Survey of India, that often partners with other institutions such as universities to host conferences, to conduct collaborative activities, and to preserve and protect the archaeological heritage with the aim of being able to let people come and visit these many, many wonderful archaeological sites. But there are, of course, some challenges in the making of archaeological heritage protection that factor into the reason why we are here today. And with the support of you, support of the donors to AIA, and anyone who is able to write a letter on behalf of the new agreement, what we have here are cases in which cultural heritage is looted, disrupted from its context, sold, and then exported to places that are then places where people buy antiquities in ways that are very much contrary to the ethics of archaeological practice and to the sovereignty of archaeological heritage from their host nations. So I show you here the activities of Indian customs, and customs and border protection equivalents in India are very keen to ascertain the channels of distribution of illegally looted materials. Many times rural places have temples where their figures are stolen and smuggled out. So that's one thing that this cultural heritage agreement would want to reduce. And our US-based protection and return is something that is being worked out at the highest governmental levels. It is something of great interest to people in the archaeological establishment here in India. And I have here a nice quote from the Indian Express that explains how it is that there are two simultaneous activities that are envisioned in this agreement. First of all, that it will reduce and deter looting and theft of cultural property, but it will also enhance the opportunities for sharing educational and research results across this important Indian and US collaborative activity. So that is something that I want to highlight as an example of a recent exhibit, the kind of which we can envision increasing in variety, diversity, and frequency if we support this US-Indian bilateral agreement. And if you were in New York recently, you might have been fortunate enough to see this wonderful exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum of Art called Tree and Serpent. And when I was coming to India in October, I stopped in New York specifically to see this exhibit because it was truly extraordinary, the extent to which the Indian government permitted the export of some amazing examples of sculpture of the Buddhist period to New York and subsequently to another country in order to be able to identify how early Buddhism happened and all of the different kinds of artistic and sculptural activities that were interconnected. So what you see in this image is a remarkable juxtaposition of artifacts that I never thought I would see together in my lifetime. And one of them is this ivory statue from Pompeii in Italy that surely was an Indian export. But the other extraordinary thing among many extraordinary things in this gallery was this. This is a Roman bronze found in India. So these two objects are almost looking at each other across the gallery, are objects that show the ancient globalization, the ancient connectivity between the Roman world, between the Mediterranean, between the Red Sea and the Indian subcontinent in ways that are absolutely beautiful to behold in these kinds of educational contexts. And I came straight from the area of New York to India, and I was able to go to Delhi, and I was able to speak with the director of the National Museum, Dr. Mani, and I was able to speak to the Director General of the ASI, Professor K.K. Basa, and express my great appreciation for the work that they all put in to be able to make this possible. So with that, I will close and request that any aspect of India that strikes you, having been there or hoping to go there, please write a letter. Please do help support this cultural connectivity and the preservation of Indian heritage. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Smith. This was thank you so much for this very informative and incredibly helpful overview of what's happening in India. And also, it's such a great honor to hear about your work, your ongoing work, the excavations as well. I heard really wonderful things about the show at the Met as well, and how hundreds of objects have traveled actually to make that possible. So it's very, very exciting. Thank you so much. Now I want to turn the microphone to Professor Fentress, who is also joining us from abroad, right? And Lisa will tell us about Algeria and the state of archaeological heritage preservation in Algeria. So Lisa, the microphone is yours.
I am trying to share my screen. There we go. And
great.
Algeria is so very different from what Professor Smith has been talking about. There are all kinds of site-specific issues in Algeria and the relationship of Algerians to their heritage. Not always lost, but it's complicated. So Algeria is extraordinarily rich as well in archaeological sites, and has had in its past an enormous amount of archaeology done, particularly under the time when it was a French colony. We know of its prehistory. The time is not as deep as in India, because the Neolithic was spent herding sheep. Rather like the people of James C. Scott, they had the option to do agriculture and didn't bother. But around 1000 BC, you start getting waves of immigration from probably the Western Desert, and you get an influx of the people that are still there today, the Berbers or Amazigh people. And they start a perfectly ordinary Neolithic, cities developing from the 7th, even the 8th centuries BC. They develop an alphabet very similar to the Punic alphabet, not similar to, but somewhat influenced by the Punic alphabet. And you can see on the right a stela of a king called Abizar, with his name written right there next to him. So that you're getting state structures clearly with some influence of the Punic colonies that are settling on the coast at places like Cherchell. And by the 3rd century BC, you have kingdoms, different groups, the Maori, the Masaisiri, the Masili, and the Numidians. And the most famous of these kings is, of course, Massinissa, who you see on the upper right. But then you have Juba I, who fights against Rome, Juba II, brought up at the court of Augustus, married to Cleopatra Selene, who's the daughter of Cleopatra. And they had a beautiful Hellenistic court at Cherchell, which produced marvelous buildings and an urbanism. However, their son Ptolemy, you see at the bottom here, became a pain. And so the Romans decided that they would simply take over the entire available bits of North Africa, off him, and declared the colonies of Mauritius, Caesariensis, and Tingitana. So they walked into a situation where you clearly had a whole culture with these marvelous Hellenistic tombs, which Filippo Corelli suggests are based on that of Alexander. He's clearly the model. And a lot of towns. But of course, the Romans then made their own towns, of which the most famous is Tingad. When I first saw this image one like it many years ago. I thought this is Philadelphia. It has almost exactly the same plan, and it's built in 100 AD in the time of Trajan by the army with clearly military precision, but it preserves some quite extraordinary buildings and is one of the best known Roman sites ever, partially due to the fact that the French excavated it using prisoners from the nearby prison at the fort, the Roman fort of Ambyses. And then you get, in this town, as life goes on, you have very rich people, marvelous mosaics. Another example is the veteran colony at Jamila, Roman Puico. I was there when it was made a World Heritage Site in 1982. And again, you could see the way they used the landscape. They build their city down the ridge and put the Roman theater into the side of the mountain so it has a spectacular view. And then there's smaller sites. This one's an entirely Berber site called Tidis, where you can see it as a sort of red blotch in the middle of the top left side. It terraces down a hill. Everything's very small. The Roman Forum you're looking at there, and it's tiny. And then there's the tomb, still reflecting perhaps the great Hellenistic tombs of a general called Lollius Erdicus, who fought on Hadrian's Wall. Life goes on. You have the Vandal attack, but before the Vandals, just before the Vandals, perhaps, you have a new wave of Berbers coming from the south who build tombs, again, very reminiscent of those we've seen, or the Jeddah, way in the south of Algeria. The Byzantines return, they conquer the Vandals, they build forts, they build basilicas in large numbers, and eventually they are conquered in 648, the first great battle at Spitla by the invading Arab armies. And of course, life goes on. You have princely cities like the Kala of the Beni Hammad. You have extraordinary architecture with stuccos like what we find here from Zedrata and Tlemcen, and a whole much more acceptable path. So this is one of the major issues with Algeria. Because the French did all this work, and because they explicitly identified with Rome, we're bringing civilization to the other. The average Algerian doesn't feel the sort of ownership that an Indian, or even Turks, Ataturk said, everything you see is ours. Hittites, the whole lot, it's all us. But for Algeria, it's not us, or many Algerians. And this is a very unfortunate thing. Only what's post the arrival of Islam is of interest to a lot of people. And this has created this disconnect. It's certainly not true of everybody. The Berbers, particularly in the Kabylie, in the Ores, have a much greater sense of ownership of all of their past. And not by chance, most of the archaeologists are in fact Berbers. But it is problematic. The question of looting is more complicated. This is actually where my own experience comes in. As Omar said, I excavated at Sétif, which is a town significantly south of Algiers. I was planning a survey for my thesis and was told it couldn't happen. So I went to see the director of antiquities then, who was an extraordinary man called Munir Bouchnahi. He went on to be head of UNESCO. And I said, well, if I can't do that, I've got Jude free and a little money. Is there something I can do for you? And he said, nobody ever asked us that. Yeah, we've got a rescue site that you've got to do. This is the center of Sétif. We're taking down the French military camp and there's the whole Roman city underneath. And so sometime later, I started the excavation for the UNDP, basically working for the Algerians, all paid for by the Algerians. I had 3 colleagues, Algerian colleagues, of whom 2 became extraordinarily good archaeologists and then unfortunately died very young. But what we found and what was unexpected was a whole Islamic medieval town with the houses that you see here. These were the first medieval houses actually excavated in all of North Africa. And, you know, this should have started something important. But sadly, because of the death of my colleagues, it didn't really. And there have been, since then, there have been excavations at the University of Algiers. There was one major French excavation at Lambesis, which came to an end after 3 years for no good reason. There is a current survey carried out by Spanish colleagues of the area around Kipasa. And that's really it in terms of foreign participation. I think I'm missing a couple of French ones, but no other Americans ever worked there. But whereas I worked in Morocco and in Tunisia for 40 years, and the change has been remarkable. We now have a generation of great archaeologists in both Tunisia and Morocco. In Algeria, there are some good people, but the kind of large training excavation has never happened at all, apart from this thing on license. So that they don't do geophysics, they don't do, the stratigraphy is bizarre. They have, not everywhere, not always. There was a very large French excavation in Algiers itself, carried out by the government rescue thing, INRAP, but they didn't train anybody and they didn't publish. So that we're at a moment where it really all needs jump starting again. And I don't mean that Americans should necessarily do it, but I think that the program of creating a research project, making it 50-50 from the direction right down through the students, the way Tunisia and Morocco have done now for years, and getting it off the ground and keeping it there is a really serious objective. And one of the best things we could do. To go quickly to the question of looting, it exists. It's more small artifacts. I don't think we are talking about something that is to some degree a police state. But the small artifacts like this extraordinary tablet, which is one of 107 wooden tablets that emerged in 2012, 13, with a sort of bogus provenance from the 70s. I think it's entirely bogus. And they started being sold and they started being published. And then the guy who was publishing lost his job because you don't do that. It's very unprovenance. And, they contain whole wills with the slaves, the properties, the objects, the things. They are vitally important. This is the sort of thing that we've got to stop being looted. And it'd be nice to find them. I think they're in the States, but, history doesn't relate. In any case, I think it would be very important for us to renew the existing MOU, which contains the right list of objects. I mean, it's fine. But if there were a rider attached, beyond exchange for exhibitions, which of course would be useful, and they're a wonderful thing, but exchange for research, the creation of training excavations, the actually plain old scholarly contact, and the creation that we have the American, the Centre des Études Maghrébines d'Algérie, which is run by a guy called Robert Parks, and based in Oran. It's a base for scientific exchange. Anybody who wants to do their thesis there uses him. But we need more participation. We need more archaeologists who are involved with Algerian archaeology, because it's absolutely worth it. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Fentress. This was an incredible overview. I mean, this is a rare opportunity, and I'm just really feeling so lucky. You've given us a really wonderful overview of the different archaeological sort of heritage and sites and landscapes, really incredible landscapes in Algeria, and also a wonderful overview of the history of research. I think that is something that I didn't know all that much about. So I'm really, really, really thankful. And also your presentation tells so much to me about how, in terms of research, how the significance of international collaborations in the sort of archaeology of a region, how significant that is. At the same time, how that kind of heritage work, how that kind of archaeological work also need to connect with the local communities and their understanding of heritage and their understanding of belonging, and how important that is for the preservation of that body of heritage. So thank you so much. This has been super helpful, also sharing with us the sort of problems, the complexities, the challenges that we see in Algeria. Hopefully the renewal will be very, very helpful. So I want to ask our audience just to, if you have any questions for our speakers, Professor Smith and Professor Fentress, please put them in the Q&A. We may have some time to read those questions, and maybe our guests can answer them. In the meantime, I'm going to take over. Maybe Lisa, if you could stop sharing your screen.
How do I stop sharing?
Yes.
I could see new share, but I can't see.
Oh, really? Okay.
Disactiva. Audio, sorry. Got it.
Okay, great, thank you. Because what I'd like to do now is that I have a short presentation as our audience is formulating their questions. I have a short presentation about how to write a good letter of a helpful and impactful letter of support for preserving the archaeological sites and cultural heritage in Algeria and India. And so I'm going to share my screen here. Let me go there. Yes, hopefully. So how to craft a powerful letter, a strong letter to the Cultural Advisory Board for their consideration and in support of the cultural heritage presentation in these countries. So please remember that these cultural property agreements help prevent the destruction of archaeological sites in these countries and have a really major impact in reducing the looting of archaeological sites. While The agreements also mandate bilateral exchange of archaeological exhibitions, cultural exchange, and scientific collaborations across the border, as both of our speakers really kindly indicated. So even if you've never visited either of these countries in person, perhaps you've been captivated by their cultural heritage through coursework, a class that you've taken, presentations, an exhibition that you visited in the US. Your connection to the archaeological heritage of Algeria or India makes you exactly an ideal advocate for preserving those countries' past. And this is precisely a very rare occasion where you can make a real difference by spending an hour or so in drafting a letter and sending it if you're a major lover or advocate of the archaeology and history in Algeria and India. So the President's Cultural Property Advisory Committee, or CPAC, is the American body empowered to make recommendations under the 1983 Convention on Cultural Property Implementation Act, which is how the US fulfills the 1970 UNESCO Convention on the means of prohibiting and preventing the illicit import, export, and transfer of ownership of cultural property. The principal means of accomplishing this in the US is through these 5-year bilateral agreements between the US and other countries. Before these agreements are signed or renewed, CPAC reviews written testimony from the public to determine whether countries are doing their part to protect their archaeological heritage and participate in cultural exchange. So it would be really great if your letter sort of addresses this. This is where you come in. Join us in our writing campaign. We don't have much time. The public testimony for the upcoming meeting to review and consider the agreements with Algeria and India is due January 22nd, Monday. You can submit your comments by January 22nd, Monday, midnight, according to Eastern Standard Time. I'd like to quickly walk you through some easy steps and effective strategies for crafting these powerful letters in support of the CPAC. So we recommend here's the due date for the recommendation, and these links will be posted on the AIA website along with this video recording as well. So we are recommending. Oh, what did I do? Sorry. I'm missing my steps here. Okay. We're recommending a three-step approach. In the first step, please introduce yourself and talk about your connection to Algeria or India. CPAC really values the personal connections and real experiences of archaeological sites. We've heard from Professor Smith and Professor Fentress about their own excavations, their own work in both of these countries. This kind of first-hand experience is really key for the committee's deliberations. Possibly, maybe you went to an Inspire, even if you haven't excavated there. Maybe you've seen an exhibition or you've been to an inspiring presentation like the ones that you heard today. All of these connections are worthwhile to highlight in your letter. The committee would also be interested to hear if any of you feel that cultural patrimony of the country you're writing about is at risk from the pillage of archaeological sites. We heard that. We've heard about this from both Professor Smith and Professor Fentress. The risk of such destruction comes from mainly looting operations, urban or rural development, and infrastructure projects Climate change now is one of the causes or various kinds of disasters, such as an earthquake or wildfires or floods, of course, but mainly, of course, the trafficking of antiquities. And in the second step, we would like you to share the knowledge and experience to illustrate what country you're writing about is already doing its job to protect its archaeological heritage. So are there any new museums or cultural institutions to support heritage preservation, or scientific research has been opened in India or in Algeria? Perhaps you may be aware from the news a new legislation that's geared towards heritage preservation in that country. Any heritage processes or institutionalization that aligns well with heritage preservation goals. A new exhibition, a kind of a traveling exhibition happening. These really may be very powerful points to raise. Third, we would like you to end your letter by explicitly expressing your support of the bilateral agreement, which is often also referred to as a memorandum of understanding between the two countries. Here, it may be helpful to point out that a memorandum of understanding will be in the interest of the international community to encourage the exchange of cultural materials, making this rich assemblage available to world communities, increase research on this body of archaeological heritage, and assure the preservation of sites and museums. That's it. So, and then submit your letter through regulations.gov website anytime before 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday, January 22nd. Letters can be typed into a comment box, or you can write it in a Word document or save it as a PDF and upload it to the CPAC website as well. And you can, we're going to post some sample letters on the AIA website if you look in the video description to find the URL, it will be easy to find. So if you experience the heritage of Algeria and India, we hope you'll use your voice and join us as we advocate for their future. So thank you so much. That's all I wanted to say. I'm going to stop sharing here, and let's see if we have some Q&A. If we have some questions from our audience. So I am going to read. We received some questions. So the first question is from Elizabeth Tuckwell. She says, would increased tourism result in more interest in archaeology in Algeria? So this is for you, Lisa.
I think it indubitably would. I took a group of friends and students, a decade ago, and they were just amazed by it. And two of them are now planning to do things in Algeria. I wish that archaeological tours would do an Algeria tour. I think they would find, a lot of enthusiasm. There are people still kicking themselves they didn't go. But yeah, I think that would be important. And it's not discouraged in any way. Perfectly. You tend to get a police escort, but it's not unfriendly.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. I have one more question for you from Stefan Hassam. While Algeria has historically had a very controlling and cold attitude towards foreign excavation, have you or your colleagues working in the Maghreb noticed any change in the attitudes towards archaeology from the perspective of the Ministry of Culture or local nonprofit groups?
There's an Italian phrase, which is muro di gomma, which means like it's a rubber wall. They don't say no. Mm-hmm. And my Spanish colleagues, after 4 years, got their project. It would be very helpful, and I can, if you've got thoughts, I can provide names, but to have an Algerian colleague who is pushing with you, somebody from a university, that would help. But recently I spent 18 months on a project that the embassy wanted on the Madrasa tomb cemetery of, and got nowhere. I mean, they didn't say no, which is, it's frustrating. But I think if you really persevere, and particularly if you have a friend who's Algerian, it could work.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you. Monica, would you like to comment on the same point, maybe from the India side, in terms of the sort of permit applications and how to work with the government in India in the sort of for the archaeological projects?
Yes, but there have been a number of us from the US who have worked in India on sites of various time periods, and a number of students have gotten PhD research that they've done here, mostly working always in collaboration with the Archaeological Survey of India, which is the permit granting government body, and also with the American Institute of Indian Studies, which is the kind of consortium headquarters institution for Americans who are coming to India, not only for archaeological work, but also anything having to do. There's so many subjects to study in India, in addition to archaeology, everything from political science to dance to economics to theory to art. I mean, there's just many, many things. So there is a very active American community of researchers reflected in the American Institute of Indian Studies.
Yeah, I should mention the American Institute of Maghreb Studies as well. That's very important for North Africa.
That's really wonderful. That's really wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. This has been really incredibly helpful. I don't have any other, I'm not seeing any other questions from our audience. But is there anything else that you would like to add as final words, Lisa and Monica?
I think writing the letters would be a very important thing to do. I mean, one's got to start somewhere. I suppose one just keeps on plugging.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, please do write. Even a short letter, something that's heartfelt, something that reflects what you've already learned or experienced, or what you would like to experience someday, vicariously or directly. Please do go ahead and write. It's a wonderful way to make a contribution to the things that the AIA stands for: the educate, advocate. All the things that we like to do as people in the AIA and attached to all the great things that the AIA does. So thank you in advance.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for organizing.
Thank you for your contributions and for your really brilliant presentations. I learned so much today. And I want to thank all of our audience members, our members who followed this webinar. We're going to post this online as well. So if you'd like to share it with your friends, with your colleagues who couldn't really make it today, please do so. And I want to sort of really emphasize again how important, in terms of really the international importance of cultural heritage in both of these incredibly rich countries, and just sort of really keeping the connection open through the cultural exchange that these bilateral agreements provide us is going to be really important. So please take some time to write letters. And thank you for your time in the middle of your day or at the end of your day for spending your 1 hour with us. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.